The meeting's in order at 7 o'clock. We're going to be meet and greet socializing. We did that. We're going to do a new member recognition. We do have a new member here. He's not going to stand up and do a speech, even though I asked him to, but he's not running for office. Anyway, so we're going to start off. I'm John N7NWL. I'm president. So when something goes wrong, I get in trouble for it. When it goes right, somebody else gets credit. And that's why I get the big annual salary, which is non-taxable. Thank you. I appreciate that. And the big year-end bonuses. So I'm going to hand it off to Patrick. Just pass the mic around if you would, please, sir.
I'm Patrick, WD9EWK.
Richard, N7NT.
Steve, K7 Sugar Pop-Up.
Lee, KY7M.
Eric, KC7ES.
Doug, W7IXA.
Dave, N7RK.
Ron, WA0KDS.
Ingrid, W7ISG.
Norm, N9AV.
Walt, NJ8G.
Bob, K7BHM.
Jim, KC1BB.
Not K7RGT.
Mike, N7MW.
I'm the new guy, Sid, K5XI.
Bill, Alpha 4 Quebec.
Gary, KC7CF.
Brian, W7JET.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Appreciate everybody being here.
People.
I forgot Ned and I forgot Israel. Ned, hit it.
Oh, yeah, AA7A. Easy.
Israel?
Yep, this is Israel, K7 and all.
Patrick's already here. Tommy, WE7, okay. Introduce yourself, please, sir. No microphone. Okay, who'd I miss? Everybody's bouncing around. I think that's all that I'm seeing. Okay, a couple of things. These are the not fun parts. I learned about 2 weeks ago that back on February 7th, one of our members, Paul KR2E, became a silent key. So if you would please stand for a moment of silence in his remembrance. Thank you. Go ahead and be seated. I appreciate that. One thing that came up a few minutes ago that I haven't run into here before, but this is not a religious endorsement of any kind, but I'm aware with several of our members and their families that they've got stuff going on. So regardless of whatever your religious preference is, if you would keep our members and their families in their prayer and thoughts, I appreciate it. And it never hurts at all. So that's all for that stuff. Now on to the fun stuff. Working satellites and DX by His Eminence Patrick.
Thanks, Sean. Let me get the slideshow going. Okay, I think I'll minimize that there. Okay, I'm partial to the old logo. I like the color one too, but I like the old club logo. But let me get through here. Working satellites in DX. It's something that used to happen a lot more in the past. It's starting to come back again, and we'll be talking about that while doing this presentation. I was here. I actually gave, not at, I don't think it was at this location, but I did give a presentation on working DX and satellites back in 2019. At that time, it was just not possible to get a satellite DXCC from Arizona. The best we could do I added up all these countries. You would probably get into the 70s if you could work somebody in each one of the DXCC entities in North America, the few in Northern South America, the little bits of Europe. If you got somebody, there was somebody that used to be active in the Russian Far East, but Eastern Siberia, if there are hams, they're HF hams, they're not satellite hams, and Africa was just out of reach, probably by about, well, if you drove toward Lordsburg, New Mexico, you could probably get satellite passes with the Canary Islands just in the footprints available then. That's, how close, a couple 100 miles off. And this was the map I showed in that presentation in 2019 that highlighted what parts of the world you could work from Central Arizona. And you can see there's a little bit, Northern South America, Hawaii, the Russian Far East, no Japan, no Korea, maybe just the smallest sliver of mainland China and little bits of Europe, but not enough to get to 100 from here. At the time it was, before I talked about how it didn't take much to get started to work satellites, and that's still true today. You can still use a dual band handheld radio and a handheld antenna, and there is some DX to work on the satellites that you can use FM radios with. You could probably get to about 20 or so countries just with current activity on the FM satellites. It's not DXCC, but for many, it's a start. For me, I've purchased more equipment. I've gone beyond just the handheld radio, and I've done single sideband and CW by satellite. I used to use a pair of FT817s for that, but I still use a single FT817 to transmit and an ICOM handheld receiver for the downlink from the satellites, and a dual band mobile radio for the FM. And this was a picture at the visitor center at Oregon Pipe a couple years ago. And nice, safe place to park. The Border Patrol always checks in on me, along with the National Park Service rangers. I'm either asked, can I track animals or can I listen in on the Border Patrol? And the answer is yes, I can track animals, but I don't. And no, I can't hear the Border Patrol. Their encrypted digital system is beyond what I have, and that's okay. DM31. Yeah, I go down there a lot. Unlike on 6 meters, it is not so rare on satellites because I usually make 1 or 2 trips a year down there to put it on the air. And usually parking at the visitor center, just because that's a few miles up from the border fence, so I'm not going to get hit by the gunfire on the other side. And there's a hill between me and the border, so there's a backstop. So that's kind of a safe place. I used to park at the big parking lot next to the gas station at the border, but the last time I did that in Lukeville, I did hear gunfire from across the fence, and that's the last time I hung out there to play radio. Always fun. If we were east of the Mississippi River, because of geography, we'd be able to get a satellite DXCC. There are hams who have done that without the benefit of the high orbit satellites of the past, like Oscar 10, 13, or 40. A couple hams have gotten its, with FM satellites where they can reach some stations in Western Europe, and Oscar 7 or the Russian RS-44 in slightly higher orbits. And you can also work more of South America because of geography. You're closer to most of South America compared to where we are here in Arizona. I have worked Europe, and I put Europe in quotes because Iceland for ham radio is considered Europe, even though it's in the middle of the North Atlantic. And I did work a guy there a few years ago. He was on the western edge of the island, and I had to actually drive up to Sunset Point because from my house, I wouldn't have heard him. Too much noise in the neighborhood, but stayed within my area for VUCC and of course DXCC. Like I listed up there for the awards, we can go anywhere within the continental US to be in this DXCC entity. So I could operate and have operated from the East Coast as well as from here, from California and bunches of other places. The VUCC limit for satellite is 200 kilometers or 124 miles. And for worked all states, you have to be within 50 miles of the locations you use toward an award. And for my satellite stats, even though I don't have a DXCC, I do keep track of it. I'm about a third of the way there from here in Arizona, from continental US. I've worked a bunch of grids. I travel a lot and operate from places where I go. So I have multiple satellite VUCC awards. And from the Phoenix area, I have worked all 488 grids for the continental US. The satellite operators use the Fred Fish Award list. So that includes DM02, San Clemente Island. Satellite hams have sailed offshore and operated. And about a year and a half ago during field day, there was a group on from the island, a new club that was formed at the Navy base. And then other places like C93 in the Channel Islands off Santa Barbara. My Zoom is doing weird stuff. I've worked all 50 states. I did that many years ago just using FM satellites, the dual band handheld radio and antenna. I've worked all 13 Canadian provinces. Uh-oh. Even Nunavut. There's a weather station in the Eureka station that's above 80 degrees north. Eureka has a ham station, and they have a couple of guys who've worked satellites. So that's my one and only contact with Nunavut, really any band, any mode. This thing is, I think I need to rejoin the, it booted me out of your, yeah. So let me get back on, but I'll keep talking, and then you'll have to probably redesignate me as a presenter when I come back online. Well, I'm getting the connecting, but it's not apparently not letting me connect. The joys of live presentations. Well, joys of computers. I heard that. That's okay. Yeah. Well, there's more than one way to do this. We'll try joining one more time on this, and then there I go. Okay, I should be coming back. Okay, we'll try this. Here we go. Started screen sharing. There we go. Yeah, got it back. Sorry about that. Fun of technology. Yeah, the Canada Award. I mean, I wanted to get worked all states in a satellite VUCC when I started working satellite. But once I realized I had worked somebody in Yukon several years ago, I worked a guy in the Northwest Territories in about 2010, and then the Eureka station in the far north of Nunavut a few years ago. That's when I realized I could actually get all of the Canadian provinces and territories. Then it was emailing people, making schedules, and I was able to do that. So that was a fun exercise. And I've operated from, not just here in the Phoenix area, but half of the US states, and operated from Washington, DC, and Canada, Mexico, and Australia. I like to drive. I just traded in my car after 190,000 miles in 12 years. And a lot of that was for working satellites. And that's my map of the grids I've worked from from the Phoenix area, all of the continental U.S., fair bit of Mexico, bits of Canada where there's usually people, and then the odd spots up north, Bermuda and Iceland. Others have done better, but considering I don't have a home station, I'm not complaining about this one bit. This works for me. And where I've operated from, other than a couple spots in near the Sierras in Northern California and Northern Nevada, I've worked pretty much everywhere in the southwestern corner of the continental U.S. and then lots of trips. I've gone to Dayton. I've gone to ARRL convention in Hartford in 2014. So I operated from Hartford, and then, I drove to Maine. Had nothing else to do before flying home. So, put more miles on the rental car. I think they retired it when I returned it to Hartford. Unlimited mileage. I love it. And then the inset, the little map, I went to Australia in 2011 and I operated from Melbourne and Sydney. Took the portable gear with me. The licensing had just changed where I didn't need to get an Australian call sign. They recognized foreign licenses for the first time. As I was saying, DXCC wasn't possible here. For our friends in Europe, Africa, and other parts of the world, they have a geostationary satellite. It's a payload on a communication satellite called QO100. I think Ingrid operated through it in Europe a couple years ago. But nothing really close to that here. The closest we could get to using QO100 is either the eastern tip of Brazil into the South Atlantic, and there has been a group from French Guiana connected with the Space Center down there. They're on the very edge of the footprint for that transponder in geostationary orbit. But for us here, we haven't had a high orbit satellite available to us since 2004 when AO40 went kaput until recently, a satellite called Green Cube. Green Cube is 3 of these 4-inch cubes bolted together. So it starts as a CubeSat, a larger one to accommodate all the radios, computers, and other payloads. And built in Italy, a couple of Italian universities, the Italian government, and the European Space Agency all helped to get the satellite on a launch. And it was the first launch of a newer European rocket called the Vega C. It was the first launch from from French Guiana in South America, and it got I believe it was a free ride, and it got a nice ride to an orbit of about 6,000 kilometers, about 4,500 miles up. By comparison, our highest satellites available over here are maybe a quarter of that height, around 1,500 kilometers, approaching 900 to 1,000 miles up. So with the higher orbit, bigger footprints, and instead of just bits of South America, very little of Europe, and a little bit of Asia, now most of the world is within range from here, and people have been taking advantage of that. And a thing among satellite operators was, it's not DX, but the Worked All States Award with the other satellites we have. Hams up in the Northeast were not able to work Hawaii, so they could get to 49 states. They could work Alaska, but Hawaii was just out of range for them. So there were a lot of hams sitting on 49 of 50 states until Green Cube was launched in 2022. And there was a ham from Alaska, ironically. Christmas of 2022, he flew to Honolulu and spent a few days playing satellite from Hawaii. And not only was he giving a lot of U.S. satellite hams their 50th state, he was working Europeans, he was working Asians. A lot of people got their satellite Worked All States awards that weekend. Plus, of course, it's a new DXCC entity if they're working toward that award. And the passes, when I've done demonstrations, many of you have seen me at the Hamfest and other places talking through these satellites in lower orbits. I have maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the outside available while the satellite's in view. With Green Cube, that goes to an hour and almost an hour and a half on some passes. So an example would be at the start of the pass, the satellite's coming up from the southwest. You're hearing Eastern Australia. You're hearing Japan, Korea, the easternmost parts of China. And then in the middle, say 15, 20 minutes, you've got all the Americas, North and South, Central America. There are a few on from there. And then the last part of the pass are your Europeans, a couple from Africa, and even some of the guys in Western Siberia and the Asiatic part of Russia, all within range, where just a couple years ago, that was a dream. And, almost every pass, you can work stations on other continents from here. And this is a picture of the Green Cube satellite before its launch. The piece on the left side of the picture, that contains some seeds. They were doing, some of the experiments are analyzing seeds and plants in orbit. The rest of the satellite is similar to the little cubes here. They're onboard computers, radio equipment, systems to monitor the batteries and the solar panels. Everything you would have in a, this sort of a CubeSat satellite, along with the digipeater that hams have been using. And this is, using that same mapping software that made the other map that I used in 2019. Now, it might be hard to see on the screen here, but it's pretty much, Eastern Australia, New Zealand, part of Antarctica, the Philippines up toward China, Japan, Korea, much of Asia and Europe, and a fair chunk of Africa. So all 7 continents are in range, where that wasn't an option for the last 20 years from over here. And the range between you and the other stations can be as far as 13,000 kilometers. So that's about, say, 8,500 miles between you and the other stations, going through the satellite, of course. This satellite, Green Cube, it's a single frequency digipeater. It's like, the digipeaters that are used for APRS, except it's on a satellite, and it doesn't use the normal packet like you would use if you're driving or walking around and you're on 144.390 on the local APRS network. It uses a slightly different packet protocol, but the software is free. You can install that on a Windows computer. It's written by a ham in Kyiv when he's not getting bombed out of his apartment block. When the satellite became operational late in 2022, that first winter in Ukraine was a lot of daily and nightly bombing all over the country. In between bombing, when he had power, he would tweak his software as hams would report to him on the performance. So he was posting new versions, sometimes nightly, if he had access to power and internet. And he has a website where he makes that available. He's got other software to do traditional packet on his website. It's all free. It's not trial and pay for a license. It's completely free to use. He'll take donations if you want. And combine that with the terminal program that you'll see in a moment looks somewhat similar to the software you use for FT4 or FT8 or those sorts of digital modes. A ham in Denmark wrote a terminal software, so it sort of mimics, working FT8 or FT4. You can have macros defined with your exchanges, your CQ call, your location, a 73. It'll write to a log file, or it'll also write to a couple log programs. As you're going, you just push a button on the screen and it'll write the contact you just made to a log file. It interfaces with the software modem, the sound modem from our Ukrainian friend, and a couple of log programs. And like anything else on satellites, we do have to deal with the Doppler effect, even when the satellite is using a single frequency. When we transmit to the satellite, we have to adjust our frequency upward as the satellite's moving across the sky. And conversely, to hear the downlink, we have to start high above the nominal frequency and tune downward. So in the middle of the pass, the two frequencies will come together and then they'll diverge for the remaining half of the pass. There's software like for any other satellite operations that can handle the Doppler control automatically, so you don't have to fumble with VFOs during a pass. And this is a screenshot of that GreenCube terminal program. These shortcuts, you know, you define your macros and you can assign them to a function key or click the button on the screen. You can click on a call sign that comes through on the satellite and it'll populate the to field. And then you can pick your message and transmit that satellite and, you know, for the other station to receive. And it's also keeping score off to the side of what call signs are being heard. And if you've interfaced this with your log, it'll even tell you if you've worked this station before. So, you know, I want to call them over and over again on every time you see a particular station. It's a rather useful program. At this point, I'm going to talk more about a ham friend of mine who lives in Nogales. You know, unlike me, I haven't done anything with GreenCube at home. I haven't had the time. I just started a new job a few months ago, and I've been accumulating the different radio and all the cables and the sound card interface. So I'm hoping to get on from home myself and also on my road trips. But I'll talk about what's already being done from here in Arizona using this satellite. A friend, Fernando, he's now taken a local, you know, Arizona 7th area call sign, but he's from Puerto Rico, and until a couple years ago, he was using NP4JV from Nogales. He lives just in, you know, in sight of the border fence on the way to the truck crossing west of the interstate down there. So he can see Mexico out his front door, but usually he will operate on a hill behind his house if the Border Patrol hasn't already parked there. Slightly. Yeah, I think you've met him, Dave. Yeah. Yeah, he started working satellites in 2015. And I know this because he worked me when I was in Canada at that time. I was on a trip and was parked near Lake Huron, across the border at Sarnia, Port Huron, and I went up along the lake on the Ontario side. And I hear NP4JV, and I wasn't looking exactly where the satellite footprint was at the moment. I'm thinking, great, I've worked Puerto Rico from Ontario. Until I look his call sign up after the pass and realize he's 2.5 hours away from where I live. But for him, I was his first satellite contact, and before I could look him up, he had already emailed me thanking me for, you know, making that contact. You know, we've worked each other many times when we've been in our homes or other places over the years since. And like me, he doesn't have a home station in his apartment. You know, he can't set up a home station. So it's either out in front of his apartment in the parking lot or the hill behind the apartment. Again, when the Border Patrol isn't sitting there watching the fence and this ranch that's just north of where he lives, you know, doing their job. Before GreenCube, you know, like me, Fernando had gotten his worked all states. He got a satellite VUCC. He's qualified for the Canada Award, but he has to get a couple of hams to witness his application. So I suggested he goes to a radio club meeting in Green Valley or Tucson, and he hopes to do that really quick. And that's what he used to work me in 2015, a Baofeng handheld and a dual band Yagi, what many use to get started on satellites. You know, some people will build the antenna instead of buying it, but the Baofeng is probably about the cheapest way to get a radio that will work for this. Not a great radio, we all know that, but you know, it works. It'll do some jobs. And he got his VUCC. That's about 4 months after he started working satellites. He had confirmed contacts in Logbook of the World with 100 different grid locators. Didn't take long for that. You know, he worked all 50 states within a few months after getting his VUCC. Again, all from Nogales, and I think he used the Baofeng for all of that. You know, for all 50 states. But now, like me, he's upgraded his equipment. You know, when he decided to try GreenCube, sitting in the back of his truck, he's using a Yaesu FT897, HF, VHF, UHF. It's the bigger cousin to the FT817 and 857. On 70 centimeters, I think it outputs 20 or 25 watts. At the time when he started, he was holding the UHF half of his dual band Yagi. So he would stand at the back of his truck, hold the antenna out and point toward the satellite while he's using his other hand to work the laptop to make his contacts through GreenCube. He has since replaced the FT897 with an FT817 and a UHF amplifier. I think he said he got it from DX Engineering. It's a little easier for him to set up and travel with than the FT897. Still using the laptop for the software. And instead of holding the antenna, he's gotten a slightly larger antenna and put it on a tripod. So he'll have to move the antenna every couple of minutes, but at least he's not holding it for an hour or an hour and a half, which he has done, and I've seen others do if they don't have a tripod for their antennas. And what has he done with GreenCube from Arizona? Well, he increased his satellite grid count. I think he was in the 800s before GreenCube was launched. He's now at 1,133. He's worked 117. He's confirmed contacts with 117 DXCC countries. I think he was in the 30s before GreenCube came. He's worked 25 of the 40 CQ zones in the first few months of that satellite. And for the satellite version of the Worked All Zones Award, you only need a minimum of 25. And then you can endorse that at 35 to 40. He's worked, along with hams getting all 50 US states, what a more recent development is working all the Japanese call areas and prefectures. And there are some Japanese hams who have taken to driving up and down their country, operating from different spots that you would look on a map like, why are you there? But the hams know. He does have the Worked All JA award for the 10 call districts, and he's one prefecture shy of the Worked All JA award for the 47 prefectures. And this is in about a year and a half. And strictly through GreenCube, the only state he hasn't heard or worked is South Dakota. He has worked the other 49 states through that satellite. Yeah, you would think maybe Alaska or Hawaii, but there are actually a couple of Hawaiian hams who are on this satellite regularly, and a couple who pop up from Alaska when it's not winter. So maybe they'll surface in a few weeks. And the Worked All Zones Award, I think they're now up into the 60s in the number of satellite Worked All Zones awards that have been issued. His was 47 when it was issued in January of last year. Wasted no time getting up to 25 zones. That's the all Japan districts. That's the 10 call areas. He got his DXCC in August last year, so less than a year on that satellite. He was able to get over 100 countries, and like I said, he's approaching 120 now. And I need to try this soon. There are DXpeditions that have been using GreenCube. Like for example, the recent group that went to Clipperton, they did take an EME station, and when they weren't doing moon bounce, they were working this satellite. And a lot of hams were able to put GreenCube in their logs for satellite as well as other bands, because this is single frequency. The software you can teach, a little easier to teach. The point and click, like if you're already working FT8, other than the fine tuning for Doppler, working this satellite is very similar. And I have worked from Fernando Station about a year ago. I picked up about 8 countries in 45 minutes, and all new grids, as far east as Western Siberia, the Asiatic part of Russia, places that I had, without this satellite, I'm not going to hear until someone launches, another high orbit satellite, if that happens again. But I'm getting set up to try this on a regular basis and take the gear with me. Like when I go down to Oregon Pipe, or I drive, I've done 3 road trips in the last 3 weekends in my new car. I could easily haul gear for this satellite along with the other satellites I work. So this has changed, for many, the concept of DXing. Instead of thinking, well, I'll never get DXCC, or maybe only the guys east of Cleveland will be able to get DXCC with our other satellites. This opens it up to everybody in the US at least. There's more than enough countries to get to 100 on the satellite. And if everybody was on from everywhere, I didn't do a count, but it would probably be pushing toward 200 countries if you worked everyone in every possible country that you could reach through that satellite, Arizona. And with that, and my thanks to Fernando for helping me put all this together. This is a quick talk through of Green Cube. I'm happy to answer questions now, or of course after the meeting by email. Yes, sir. 435.310. So it's just use a single sideband radio. It's packet, but it's not the traditional AX.25 packet like it's built into the Kenwood radios for APRS. But the software, like I said, there is a source for the software. Now, there's a company that makes radios compatible with this form of packet, but the free software on a Windows PC is obviously a cheaper way to try it. And you might like it. If you do FT8 or FT4, unlike FT8, you could type longer messages. You could have a conversation through the satellite, but most people right now, it's still enough of a novelty that they're using as short of transmissions as possible. So it's grid squares, maybe an RR73 at the end, and not so much of, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm sitting here in Arizona, nice to meet you, and possibly incurring the wrath of others who are saying, you're tying up the satellite. Coordination, novel idea, hasn't been sorted out yet. It's catch as catch can. Pretty much. And here in Arizona on that band, we're limited to 50 watts because, the military restrictions. I think, if I remember, you can get a variance if you do moon bounce because in part your antennas are always pointing a certain elevation above the horizon. So you're not going to shoot 1500 watts into Davis Mountain Air Force Base or Luke Air Force Base. But I don't know if they'll issue those permits for satellites. I don't know if anybody has tried. But you might end up with conditions like you must wait for the satellite to be 15 or 20 degrees above the horizon before you use the higher power. Or the military may just say no. Hey, Dave.
What's the deal with Mexico and satellites now?
That's interesting. Last year, the Mexican regulator, IFT, changed all of their regulations related to all satellites, commercial satellites and amateur satellites. And for amateurs, hams from anywhere in the world can get a permit. It would be XE, for example, XE2 stroke home call, costs nothing, but you're limited to working satellites. Can't do HF. You can't even work VHF simplex. It's only through a satellite. But you have to send paperwork to Mexico City, like your amateur license, your passport ID page or something that identifies you. You have to get those certified in a certain way at a Mexican consulate before you ship them down there. There are no fees, but you don't mail anything to Mexico City if you want it to get there. So you're paying FedEx or DHL or UPS. No, they said it was not a mistake. It was entirely intentional. It was part of modernizing their satellite regulations. No, that was intentional. But they've limited that just to satellites. Dave, you and I have talked about this many a times. There are a certain group of hams in Mexico who would rather see no foreigner ever operate from Mexican territory, ever. The reciprocal agreements with the U.S. would be torn up. We had one. Well, it wasn't reciprocal in terms of, what Mexicans get to come here is the same as what we would get going there. The FCC did away with all applications for foreign hams in the late 90s. So the Mexican hams can come up here and operate without filing paperwork. We had to file paperwork in the 2000s, Yeah.
And $90 in a couple hours
And,
it was okay.
and a little bit of glad handing with the communications hefe, who is a ham. Yeah, after Dave's paperwork was filed, we went down the street to pay the fee into the ministry's bank account. We came back and the hefe asked if we had a few minutes. Well, are we going to say no? No. Well, we were there for about an hour and a half or 2 hours just chatting away. It was a fun day.
Good states.
Yes. But unfortunately, as far as I know right now, there's only one non-Mexican ham who has gotten a permit this way. It's a Cuban who lives in Monterrey in Northeast Mexico. I'm not aware of any hams resident outside of Mexico going through the process. My friend Fernando has looked into this. He just needs to get all the paperwork. You know, it's a form of notarization at the consulate in Nogales and then ship it to Mexico City. You know, the process sounded like, hey, this is great. At least it's something, but it's Mexico, so it's bureaucracy and paperwork done their way. Yeah, that's about the only saving grace here is that the permits are free. You know, nobody takes money for it. Not like in the past where it was almost $100 for a permit to do it legally, and then there was the office in Tijuana that wasn't authorized to issue permits, but they wrote them out. They got paid for them. Hi, Bob.
Recent cartels jumping in on these frequencies.
Cartels, no. Usually, if you hear non-ham activity coming from south of the border, it's the usual assortment of Mexican taxi cabs, businesses that are using 2-meter radios like, you know, the license-free FRS or GMRS. Okay, those need licenses, but, you know, using radios outside the ham bands, you know, they can get 2-meter radios. They can get Baofangs down there for about $50 or $60, which is still cheaper than a proper business band radio. We haven't had the issues like in the early 2000s where the Mexican Red Cross was using a satellite uplink frequency as its dispatch in San Luis, you know, south of Yuma. Mm-hmm. But it takes a lot more to get anything to happen down there. And in the case of the dispatch service, all the Mexicans did was move them out of the satellite uplink range on 2 meters. They were still on another 2-meter frequency, but they weren't being heard by a satellite a few hundred miles up. So, sure.
How many CADXA members have signed on the satellite using K7WK?
Tom and I have done that in the past. I don't know if anyone else has, at least in the recent times, but I've done it, 2012. I was doing it from my home in Scottsdale and also at the Hamfest in Yuma that year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's probably a couple of videos. I think there was one from the Hamfest, and I set one up in the backyard of my house where I put up I printed out the K7UGA QSL card, put it on a stick in the backyard so it was in view of the camera. And I think I also did a video from the Territorial Prison Park in Yuma. No, not from inside the prison. Actually, I couldn't get in there. It was the park was closed on Sunday morning. I will stop my sharing on that.
Good. Well, thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that was fun. Any questions or comments or anything from our Zoom folks, Ned, Israel, Tommy?
Good show, Pat. Good show.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Good presentation.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to do a break.